Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling, well, one of the really foundational stories, isn't it? Cain and Abel. Genesis chapter 4. Seems so simple on the surface, but gosh, it just sticks with you. It raises these huge questions that people have wrestled with for centuries. Like why was Abel's offering okay and Cain's wasn't? What was really going on inside Cain to make him, well, do what he did? And maybe the one that hits hardest for a lot of people. Why didn't God step in? So our plan today is to dig much deeper than just the Sunday school version. We've gathered quite a stack of sources. We're looking at ancient Jewish midrash, those fascinating rabbinic interpretations. We've got powerful stuff from Christian letters, some really insightful commentary from Islamic tradition, and even modern scholars looking at it through things like narrative theory and political theology. The goal here is really to unpack the layers, to see this story not just as history, but as this profound meditation on, human conscience, divine silence, and maybe how civilization itself kind of grows out of exile. We're going to explore a few key things.
Those mysterious offerings, the power in Abel's silence, Cain's defiant voice, that strange mark he gets is a divine politics, and this idea that civilization gets built by a cursed hand, plus a really unique bit from the Qur'an about a raven. So, ready to jump in?
Absolutely. It's a story that just keeps giving, doesn't it? It resonates because it hits on things so fundamental to being human.
Okay, let's set the scene then. Genesis 4, verses 3 to 5.
Yeah.
Cain brings some fruit of the ground. Abel brings the firstlings of his flock, the best parts. And then, bam, this incredibly short line. God had regard for Abel, but no regard for Cain. Just like that. And this little distinction, it sparks the first murder. What's going on there?
It's amazing how much ink has been spilled over that exact moment. For ages, people have asked, was it the gift itself? Maybe God prefers a blood sacrifice over plants. Or was it something deeper, the giver's attitude? Jack P. Lewis, a solid biblical scholar, actually points out the Hebrew text itself doesn't automatically condemn vegetable offerings. So the rejection isn't necessarily just about the what.
Okay, so it's not just a simple formula, plants bad, animals good.
Mm-hmm.
That makes it way more complex right away. It's about the how, the spirit of it.
Exactly, and other scholars add more layers. M. Kate Say, who really digs into the symbolic meanings, makes a compelling case. Say sees Abel as a kind of type of Christ, a figure whose inner devotion, his humility, his trust, that's what's reflected in the offering. And you see this echoed in the New Testament, right? Hebrews 11:4 says, by faith Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice. Faith, it goes on, through which he received approval as righteous. He died, but through his faith, he still speaks. So the offering is an outward sign of an inner reality. It's worship rooted in faith, not just going through the motions.
And Cain's reaction, it screams volumes about his inner state, doesn't it? Genesis says he got very angry and his face fell. That's pretty visceral. God even says to him, if you do well, will you not be accepted? Which really points the finger not at the harvest, but at Cain's heart.
Precisely. And Ellen Van Wold, another really insightful scholar, she makes this point. Cain is the first human character in the Bible to actually talk back to God defiantly. It's a huge moment. It's kind of the start of human moral autonomy, deciding for oneself, but it's immediately tangled up with rebellion, with resentment. So the story subtly shifts, doesn't it? From sacrifice as just a ritual, to sacrifice reflecting the relationship, the inner person. Cain and Abel become these archetypes, one rooted in trust, maybe humility, the other in pride, jealousy, and displacing blame. Abel becomes the first martyr for his devotion and his silence, while it becomes its own kind of cry.
Okay, silence.
Yeah.
That's a perfect transition. Because what's not said in this story is almost as powerful as what is said. Van Wold argues the whole narrative is constructed by what it leaves unsaid. How does that work?
It's a really profound way to look at it. Think about Abel. He literally says nothing. 0 words in the Genesis text. He's acted upon, people talk about him, he's killed, but he's utterly silent. His silence becomes part of who he is. And when C frames him as that type of Christ, it's partly because his righteousness was in his submission and his silence. And Hebrews saying he still speaks. It's not literal sound, obviously. It's that his faithful silence has this lasting echo, a spiritual message that outlives him. It speaks to his character.
Wow, and that's such a stark contrast with Cain. Cain speaks. He's the first human to really engage God directly. And it's not exactly humble prayer, is it? He argues, he protests, he doesn't repent. And then, after the murder, that chilling line, that question, am I my brother's keeper? Genesis 4:9, just sends shivers down your spine.
Right. Van Wold sees this as the birth of human subjectivity, the individual speaking their mind. But it's immediately twisted into self-justification, rationalization, and evasion. Speech, for Cain, becomes a weapon, a shield, a way to dodge responsibility.
And God's response is just as powerful and kind of mysterious too, isn't it? The voice of your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. Genesis 4:10.
It's this incredible paradox. Abel's silence becomes this deafening voice, a scream rising from the earth itself. See, it points out his blood literally becomes a witness against the injustice, which is interesting when you compare it to Hebrews 12.24 later on, which says Christ's blood speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. Abel's cries for justice, maybe vengeance, while Christ speaks of mercy, of redemption. Different kinds of cries from the ground.
The tension is just, wow. Abel dies silent, but he's the moral compass. Cain lives, he talks, he even builds things, but he's drifting away from God into this isolation. His punishment isn't death, it's exile, being cut off, living alone with his story.
Let's go back to that question, am I my brother's keeper? It's more than just Cain trying to deflect, isn't it? It feels like the fundamental question about human ethics. Are we responsible for each other? It absolutely is. Van Wold points out it's both a lie and a challenge to God's own knowledge and authority. God asks a direct moral question, where is your brother? Cain answers with deflection and implied ignorance. And Abigail Ducan, thinking through a Lebanesian lens, that philosophical idea about our core responsibility when we encounter another person, the face of the other, she reads Cain's failure starkly. To be human in this view is to be a keeper of the other. So Cain saying no isn't just denying a fact. He's rejecting the very basis of ethical relationship. God doesn't even need to answer Cain's question directly. The silence implies a resounding, yes, you are.
And it's fascinating how different traditions pick up this thread, right? It resonates everywhere.
It really does. In Judaism, the rabbis often see Cain as the ultimate example of selfishness, someone who breaks the bonds of relationship for his own ego. It's a profound moral lapse. In Christianity, well, Abel is the martyr, the righteous one Jesus mentions in Matthew 23. Cain becomes the symbol of rebellion. Jude 1.11 links him to other figures who went astray, and 1 John 3.12 even says he belonged to the evil one. Pretty strong language.
Wow, yeah.
And then Islam offers this really distinct perspective in Surah 5. The brothers aren't named, but the focus shifts powerfully to moral restraint. The victim actually speaks back to the aggressor. He says, essentially, even if you try to kill me, I won't try to kill you because I fear God. Norman Stillman, who studied these connections, highlights how this reframes everything. It becomes a lesson about conscience, about justice, showing the crime wasn't inevitable, but a choice born from inner weakness. And then comes that incredible verse from the Qur'an, if anyone kills a soul, it is as if he has slain all of humanity. Talk about universal responsibility.
So across the board, there's this sense that Cain had a chance, right? A warning, an opportunity to turn back before it happened. It wasn't fated.
Exactly. His failure isn't just the killing itself, horrific as that is. It's the prior refusal to care, the denial of that basic connection, that moral fabric holding community together. And, this echoes right down today, doesn't it? Secular ethics grapples with the same thing. Are we responsible for the poor, the migrant, the person suffering far away? Ducan explicitly connects Cain's attitude to things like debates on immigration. That ethical slide starts the moment we label someone not my problem. It forces us to ask, who is our brother? Who are we keepers for?
Okay, so from that heavy moral question, let's look at what happens after. Cain's punishment. It's not death, which maybe you'd expect. It's exile, distance, and this mysterious mark. Genesis tells us he leaves the presence of the Lord, settles in Nod, which means wandering, and builds the first city, naming it Enoch. It's such a paradox. The outcast, the wanderer, becomes the founder of civilization.
It's one of the story's deepest ironies, definitely. Yoav Aran, who studies these narratives, suggests that exile and innovation are like two sides of the same coin here. Cain's cut off from Eden, from God's immediate presence, sure, but that distance forces resourcefulness. He becomes maybe human history's accidental architect. His city isn't Eden revisited. It's not about innocence. It's a coping mechanism for a world that's already broken. It's practical. It's survival.
And look at his descendants. Jabal, the ancestor of nomads and herders. Jubal, the father of music. Tubal-Cain, the first metalworker. Culture, technology, arts. They all spring from this cursed lineage.
Which leads us to some really interesting political theology ideas, especially from Julian Andres Gonzalez Holguin. He uses Giorgio Agamben's concept of homo sacer.
Okay, hang on. Political theology, just briefly, what's the pure idea? And then homo sacer, how does Abel fit into that?
Right. Political theology basically looks at how religious ideas, concepts about God and the sacred, shape real-world power, laws, and how societies are structured. It's where belief meets politics. Homo sacer, drawing from ancient Roman law, is this figure whose life is, well, unprotected. They can be killed by anyone, but it's not considered a religious sacrifice, nor is it punishable murder. Their life is reduced to bare life outside the normal protections of law and society. Holgan makes the argument that Abel, tragically, becomes this homo sacer figure. Think about it. God accepts his offering, which sets everything off, but God doesn't directly protect Abel himself. God never speaks to Abel, never warns him, doesn't strike Cain down immediately. Abel's life becomes, in Holgan's phrase, the invisible cost of divine sovereignty. Meaning God's non-action wasn't just passive, it actively shaped what happened next. It challenges the simple view of God as just a moral scorekeeper, presenting God as, well, a political actor whose silence has consequences.
Wow, okay, so if Abel is homo sacer, what about Cain, the survivor, the builder, the one with the mark?
Cain, in this reading, becomes something like the undocumented migrant of biblical antiquity. He lives, but outside the normal boundaries of divine and social belonging, he's included by exclusion. The mark. It's not just mercy, it's a brand, a label of displacement. It makes sure everyone sees his status as an outcast. He's protected from being killed randomly, yes, but he's never embraced. His survival is tolerated, perhaps because he's useful, he builds, his line innovates, but his legacy is practical, not sacred. He's allowed to exist, but not truly belong.
That really casts the birth of civilization in a stark light, doesn't it? Holgan's point that we build cities, not on innocence, but on the marked bodies of those we cast out. That feels uncomfortably relevant. It links straight back to modern debates about borders, who belongs, who gets excluded. Suddenly, am I my brother's keeper? Isn't just about ethics between two people. It's about the political foundations of society.
It forces a look at the foundations, absolutely, the hidden costs.
Now, there's this incredibly moving addition to the story found only in the Qur'an.
Yeah.
After the murder, a raven appears. Tell us about that.
It's a truly remarkable moment, adding this whole other dimension of moral awakening. Surah 5.31 describes God sending a raven that starts scratching the ground. Why? To show him how to hide the shame of his brother. Cain watches this simple act by a bird, and then he cries out, "Woe to me! Was I not even able to be like this raven and hide the disgrace of my brother?"
That's huge, because it's the very first sign of actual remorse we see from Cain in any tradition. Not just fear of punishment, but shame, a recognition that something sacred, human dignity, was violated. It's an internal shift.
Exactly. The raven plays, you could say, three crucial roles here. First, it's a moral mirror. It forces Cain to see the ugliness of his own action reflected back at him. Second, it's a ritual instructor. It teaches the basic, sacred duty of burial. Norman Stillman points out how this shaped Islamic practices and conscience, the idea that even a dead body matters, deserves respect. It's like theology coming from the earth up, through nature, not just a top-down decree. And third, the raven is almost an ecological prophet. Ravens in folklore are often messengers, associated with memory, even mourning. Here, it's like creation itself speaks truth, teaching Cain what death demands, how to honor the fallen. It connects him back to a moral order he had forgotten.
So it's less about God's judgment in that instance and more about Cain's own internal realization. His horror isn't just, oh no, I'll be punished. It's, oh no, look what I've done. I forgot the value of life, maybe even my own humanity.
Yes, exactly. Cain isn't suddenly redeemed, not at all, but he is profoundly changed. The raven doesn't offer forgiveness, it offers instruction, it teaches, and that teaching becomes the seed of conscience, moving beyond just fear of getting caught towards an inner understanding of dignity, respect, maybe even love. Guilt isn't the end point, it's the start of learning how to care again.
So when you pull it all together, this story of Cain and Abel, it doesn't just end, does it? It echoes. They become these figures representing choices we all face, to destroy or preserve, to honor life or neglect it.
And that mark of Cain, maybe it's not just a brand of shame, it's a consequence, yes, but also a strange kind of divine mercy within exile. He's allowed to continue, to build. It suggests something profound, maybe unsettling. Human history isn't built by perfect people, it's built by the flawed, the broken, the stained. Maybe God works even through those who fail profoundly. Maybe civilization itself has to start where innocence ends.
And Abel's silence. That line from Hebrews, by faith Abel still speaks. It's the voice of, what? Unrecorded goodness, forgotten acts of faith. It's that quiet conscience that history tries to bury, but it keeps bleeding through, urging us to listen.
And the raven's lesson, a reminder that morality isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's in the ordinary, the overlooked. A bird scratching in the dust can teach us the deepest things about our responsibilities to each other.
Maybe that's the challenge this ancient story leaves us with, Not that we have to pick a side, be Abel or reject Cain entirely, but maybe we're both. Maybe we're the ones who, in small ways or large, harm what we love. We're the ones who have to bury our regrets, deal with the fallout. We're the ones building our lives, our societies, on complicated, sometimes haunted ground, and still hoping for something better, for redemption. We're marked by our pasts, our choices, our shared humanity, and yet here we are, still living, still trying. So maybe the call is just to listen closely. Because there's blood in the ground, metaphorically speaking, and it still speaks.